All right. So here we be on a Friday. Okay. Good. Um, let's see. Oh, I got this at I think it's an Ace Hardware. Okay. And it's nice for inside because you can hit something you're not going to break it. Okay. Yeah, this can get pretty wild. Okay. But one of the things, if we focus, for example, on basic motion. Now, up and down. And let's just say that's a basic form. But there's you here and there's this. And what I'm kind of picking up right here, for example, there's a wave. Now for this, the way it's constructed, it's pretty easy to kind of get the feeling of wave length, wave energy. Okay. Now, other extreme, we go here. I feel the weight. Now I'm trying to move the weight, but even here, there's a not quite as dramatic. So wave vibration. And most anything, example, so we go with this, swinging, but there's what I call a cut. It's a vibration frequency to it. And I can know the cut, I can hear the cut, I can get that feeling of boom. So we go back to this one. But even in something that's heavier, it has some beat or frequency with itself, which kind of connects to me, which means I have a beat or frequency with myself. And it's kind of a team effort. So, vibration, energy. Anything you want to add or any questions?
So I've got a variety of weapons here at home,
Okay.
including a smaller inflatable sword that I use kind of the same way you're using that red thing. Yeah, because it's really short and lightweight and doesn't break furniture when I hit it. And so, and it's interesting because I find it doing the staff / spear motion, the raising and the lowering,
Yeah.
to try and create a version of what we were doing in class yesterday at the dojo with the just the relaxing and the feeling the wave, right? And it's easier for me to do it with my big heavy Joe. You know my Joe. It's pretty solid, thick Joe. It's easier for me to do it with that big heavy thing than it is with the really light inflatable thing.
Yeah.
Which you would think is counterintuitive, right? Because you would think, oh well, it's more like open hand, like we were doing yesterday. But somehow or other, like I want it to be heavier and I overcompensate. So I don't know. That's interesting to me.
Well, for example, the thing about weight. We get hypnotized by weight. But for example, that's just this one. This also has a wavelength. After a while, there's obviously a bit more physical weight and mass. This one. Now, what's interesting, to go to extremes. Now, what I found, for example, this is the other extreme. Now I'm gonna go like this and I bounce it. In other words, I'm going like boom, boom. So initially the lighter, I can do a lot of things with it. That heavy, gotta kind of surrender to it a bit. And if I pick this up after oh, what does happen? Well, the weight of that one is kind of grounding me a little bit. So the trick a little bit is, pick up something lighter. And we were to go another screen. Now, for example, I'm used to wood, but cutting. Cutting is different than striking. All right. For example, if I go this way, I can use stick. Cutting is different. It's not a striking motion. Striking, cutting. Vibration. The forms. Similar. But sort of I do with old boxes. Okay.
Yeah, so with a Joe, if you're doing
Yeah.
that kind of showman strike,
Yeah.
it's a striking motion rather than a cutting motion because even if it's a staff, it's a wooden, handle. Um, so it feels different. And I know I've also, on occasion swung your large black Boken, that Stormbringer. Yeah. And the first few times I tried it, it felt really awkward and overbalanced, even though it's actually balanced very well,
Yeah.
for its size. I was just kind of, it occupies a different amount of space. And
Yeah.
so I had to get used to that. And then once I sort of let go of what my mind was telling me must be overbalanced and let it be not overbalanced, then I could swing it like any other Boken,
Well, one of the things that you're kind of hinting at, whether you
Mm.
realize it or not, use the word space. Okay? You gotta pick it up as its weight. I'm gonna get better at swinging it. And the statement about the Joe, I mean, yeah, that's common, right? How many people, if you use something sharper, it's dangerous. So of course, you know, we're gonna, in public, do that, but Kikizuchi Sensei, you know, he kind of alluded to that. And he said that, you know, if you understand the secret of Aikido, big if, you know, we're all still studying, a boken becomes a live sword. And he didn't use Joe, he used bow, more spear length. Spear is long. Okay, Joe is very good. Okay, but the actual thrusting motion, when it's you know, wood, you know, that's a striking motion. And that's a striking motion. But it's got a sharp tip. Boom. That's a piercing motion. It's a piercing motion. Different vibration. All right. And one of the things you said, there's a space. Now, you know, there's a, you know, using Nado Sensei's numerology, there's a Bobby space. Bobby tends to kind of try to move away. There's a Robert space who gets better at it. There's a Nado space who begins to say there's something more here than just moving weight better. And there's Nado Sensei who says this is energy. And the big story with Kikizuchi Sensei and O Sensei, you know, using, you know, the analogy of the boken becomes a real sword. He and O Sensei used to, in the middle of the night when nobody else is around, to go out to the dojo when O Sensei was in Shingu. And O Sensei would use a black boken. All right. So it was all pure sensing. And when I was coming back from, you know, just before I left, returned to America in 1973, Ikizuchi Sensei had, you know, me and Mary Heine and Linda Holiday all over. He played a, you know, it was kind of a really kind of special gathering, but he had told a story earlier. And so I asked him to repeat it, you know, and, you know, the Kuro Boken no Hanashi, the story about the black boken, which is what O Sensei used. And apparently they were in the dojo, sword to sword, or boken to boken, actually. And O Sensei was using a black boken in the dojo, right? At night. You had to sense the movement. You couldn't, you know, be too outer sensory oriented. And you know, kind of, you know, I mean, repeating Michio-san. Ikizuchi Sensei's given name was Michio, so Michio-san, Uchikunde koi. Raise and cut. Okay, and then they would exchange movements, okay, in the dark. Ikizuchi Sensei had extensive background in Kendo, but also EI. So he, you know, had practice, not just, you know, Kendo, you know, it's kind of striking, right, with a sword sense to it, and art of drawing, cutting with the sword. Boom, a little different. But what happens is he and O-sensei had an exchange in the dark, and Hikisuchi sensei obviously knew the difference between hitting something and a cut. And so what happens is O-sensei's bokken and Hikisuchi sensei's bokken meet in the dark. And Hikisuchi sensei has the perception sense that instead of that there was a cut. And there was moonlight, so there was streams of light going through from the moon, right? And he looked, and the tip of O-sensei's black bokken was sheared off. And all of a sudden, Hikisuchi sensei starts looking for the tip. And O-sensei, says, Michio-san, again, Hikisuchi sensei, Nani o sagashiteru ka? What are you looking for? And Hikisuchi sensei's about to say, I'm looking for the tip. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden, where's the tip now? And O-sensei reaches inside his kimono and hands Hikisuchi sensei the tip. And so Hikisuchi sensei, and what it is that O-sensei said, now you've mastered the Aikido sword. And, we're talking about, something more than just stuff you practice, and not just wood on wood and bang, 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 bang. That's good. I mean, there's a lot of stuff gets passed on, but somehow when they were working privately, they were working on something else. And Hikisuchi sensei said, you've mastered the Aiki sword now, which means bokken demo shinken ni kawatte kuru. Wooden sword cuts, doesn't strike. And just my own personal experience. Tojima sensei, one time, there was a foreigner who was big and, he'd been doing Aikido for a while. So, he's from America. He kind of looked at all the Japanese who were small. So he kind of, I'm really tanking for these people, that sort of thing right there. And they were being pretty generous with him, right? And so finally, Tojima sensei told him, just bring a bokken, get one. So the guy gets a bokken, Tojima sensei gets one, and says, hold it as hard as you can. I'm going to knock it out of your hand with this one, and you're not going to feel a thing. And of course, this guy, just as a chance to show up the Japanese, so he grabs it like he's, grabbing out somebody's arm. He's kind of resist with everything. And he closes his eyes so he can't be hypnotized, so to speak. And Tojima sensei kind of raises. Hey! And he cuts. And I was there, and it was almost like, you get this feeling that something else has been brought in. And Tojima sensei doesn't just hit the sword. The sword is cut. And the tip of the sword goes all the way up and bounces off the ceiling of the dojo. And the end that was being held bounces off of a tatami and almost reaches the ceiling. And there's this guy like this, and he thinks he's still holding the sword. Japan. What happened afterwards and what he told me was, I really haven't been impressed by what's going on here in Japan. So, but I'll tell you, so I didn't feel a thing. And so that's kind of the stuff now we're doing weapons work. And there's another dimension. And it's almost like what you might describe as alchemy. Something wouldn't just transformed into something else, which means there's a transformation in alchemical process with the person who holds the sword. And there's all this other stuff that's going on, which is good. Yeah. But there's, if you've been around that other stuff, the transformational aspect of it, you don't forget it. Anything?
Well, for one thing, I love both of those stories.
Yeah.
Right. And I like, I mean, it even making a bokken or a Joe is a transformational process where you take wood, part of a tree, and make it into a bokken or a Joe. And of course, metal, being made into a katana or whatever. So I think there's an alchemy from just the very idea of a weapon all the way through the use of a weapon, through the making it and the using it, and you can kind of see it as one thing. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a space. It's kind of a Bobby space, where Bobby does Bobby things in the Bobby way. There's a Robert space. And Robert knows a bit more, been around a little bit. There's a Nado space who's maybe getting the sense that there's something more than just the obvious, and that there's the Nado Sensei space. So I'm using Nado Sensei's numerology. And there's the normal stuff. And then there's the what we would call the unexplainable. And what happened with Hikitsuchi Sensei and O Sensei with Black Bokken and Tojima Sensei with this guy, and later Tojima Sensei had one of the Japanese do the same thing, and the same thing happened. In other words, it wasn't just a chance accident, there was something kind of in. I almost got the feeling that what he was doing, was like in the Michael Moorcock stories, where Elric, his major character with the black blue sword, sometimes he has to call in the elementals. He has to call in the kami, so to speak. And at that particular point, and what's tricky about it is, you can read about it in a story, right? And a good writer, it's more than just reading, you're kind of feeling it. But it's real different when you're in it. And I wasn't there when Hikitsuchi Sensei sheared the tip of O Sensei's bokken off. But I was kind of in the energy field of his recounting of that story. And I was there a couple times with Tojima Sensei when he did the same thing. He sheared. He knocked the bokken out of whoever was holding it. But he didn't just knock it out. He broke it. He cut it. And same thing. The tip half goes up, touches the top of the dojo, comes down. The end the person was holding is the tatami with such force, it goes up and almost touches the top. And what you're seeing, to some degree, is magic, alchemy, whatever you want to call it, sorcery. And you can read about it or something, but when you've actually, even as somebody who's visually there, you're kind of in the vibe of it. I remember I put the Tojima Sensei story into a blog. And the way I put it was, there's almost like, he's kind of like this. And before he did the ki, I kind of felt something, a pulse, a beat, an energy surge through the dojo. It was the personal perception. And then boom, picked up. And then somebody actually reposted my story right off the blog, but that person omitted that part where I felt that something, right? And that's a tricky one right there, because if you've been in the vicinity of it, you're experiencing it. And I've had similar experiences, maybe quite not that traumatic, but I was at a luncheon. Nado Sensei and I usually meet on Saturdays, and then there's a group from his Aikido class that meets with him. And I happen to be there, but they meet at Starbucks, and then afterwards, Nado Sensei and I go off and do a bunch of crazy stuff. And so this one woman read the book, The Art of Transformation. And she read my story, all right, which was kind of what you would call, there was one of Nado Sensei's things is the monster theory. All energies come from a purity. When we are here, we're blocking out most of reality with our interior dialogue and symbol of an ordinary world. But people like Sensei could call in the energies and operate from realities which are much different, finer, more original than the ones that we're hypnotized into. And, we get stories. But, one of my stories, okay, so I'm living in Santa Cruz after my second stay in Japan. So I've been Japan and back, and Japan and back. And my mom is dying of cancer, unfortunately. And Mary Heine Sensei is flying from where she's staying in Seattle, where she is now again, to San Jose. She's going to spend some time in Santa Cruz. So I'm supposed to go pick her up at the airport. And I'm really preoccupied with my mom's condition. She's in and out of the hospital and everything. And I sort of noticed that the brakes in the car are sort of, but there's a lot going on. And so I'm driving over the hill from Santa Cruz to San Jose, and there's construction. It's a hot day. And what happens is it's gridlock, and all of a sudden I notice the brakes are going. And then I go to the side, and it's a pretty steep embankment. And what happens is the brakes are gone. And I start to go downhill, and it's very steep. In fact, things start to kind of shift into a space where things are happening very, very fast. And to some degree, the faster they go, the more slow motion they are. It's an altered state. And so I'm going down, and all of a sudden I realize I'm off the side of the road because I'm going down the hillside, and there's a bunch of trees and everything is dark. And right in the middle of all that, again, you'll get almost like instruction, there's a tree. I don't see it. Hit it, because if you keep going that way, you're gonna hit a tree, and the car is gonna spin and you're probably gonna die, so. I go, oh. See, I've never broken a Bocan, but I hit that tree head on. And the impact was such, I was wearing glasses to drive. The glasses flew off, and actually, I still have a little bit of a scar here from that. And I blank out for a little bit. When I come to, I'm looking out the windshield, and the actual car starts about a foot away from the tree. And I'm holding the top half of the steering wheel. I wish I'd kept the steering wheel, because it would have been a kind of an interesting thing to show people. And then a bunch of people come in and pull me out of the car, and I'm, they call an ambulance, and they take me to a Good Samaritan Hospital and the emergency ward, and check my pulse rate is 60 a minute. I'm totally okay. This is bleeding, so they stitch it up. And I can't pick Mary up, so I call a friend of mine, a high school friend who's also doing Aikido at the time. So John picks me up, and then we go pick Mary up. Then we go to the yard that the car was towed to, and my friend John looks at me and says, "How'd you walk away from that?" And I said, "I really don't know, not consciously anyway, but I've had an experience." This is why the story was put in Nato Sensei's book, The Art of Transformation, where Hikitsuchi Sensei did a lot of work with sound, chanting formal prayers that O-sensei chanted. And he also taught a class on Kototama, the vibrational nature of sound, how to activate energies or summon forces with sound vibration, incantation, so to speak. It's kind of the part of Aikido that's been neglected. And so what happens is, I was staying in a dormitory along with a couple of other of the foreigners that were training. And what was nice about it is we go onto the rooftop, and I would do Tai Chi on the rooftop after an Aikido class. I was pretty gung-ho at that time. And what happened? I said, nah, today before the Tai Chi, I'm going to practice the Kototama. And so, I kind of do the ascending up spiral, descending spiral. And what happens on the descending spiral, something comes down. And it's the only time in my whole life that I've gotten so scared I ran. I mean, I might run to safety or something like that in situations, But that was like something I had encountered that I had no sense of, and I ran. And I ran down into the dormitory area, thinking I'd be safe from whatever it was that came down the down spiral. And I walked in there, and the people in there, were other Americans. Robert Fraser was one of them. And they looked at me and said, "What did you call up? What did you bring in?" Huh? I mean, I explained what I had done. And of course, everybody else was freaked, And so we go into kind of a living space. There was a kitchen. It was kind of like a collective meeting living space for the dorm people. If we were just renting the upper floor where there were no employees of this resort hotel little further south, but Hikisuchi Sensei knew the guy who owned it, so he let us stay there and pay nominal rent. And I go in there and I do the Amatsu Norito, probably the most basic of the Shinto prayers 3 times, and everybody else is cool. Whatever it is, it's fine. I try to sleep. And what would happen is, I would go to sleep, I would wake up, and I would see rotting corpses floating past the window. I'd go back to sleep and I'd wake up and there'd be rotting corpses floating past the window. And then I finally went to sleep and I woke up and the sun was there and there were no more rotting corpses. And what happened is, word of it, I don't know how it got out, but Hikisuchi Sensei heard about it. And he calls me into his office and then he balls me out. He says, "You called out dark forces." I'm like, "Yeah, well, he says, "Don't you ever chant unless you're in the dojo or at a shrine, or you where you are going to call up dark forces." I'm like, I didn't know I could call up dark forces, right? Yeah. I thought, oh crap, did I do that? And then what happens? I come back to the States. And I used to train at Stanford University, but they had a very big Aikido club taught by Frank Duran Sensei. And what would happen in those days, that the area wasn't what it is now, but Nado Sensei would come in, and he and Duran Sensei were at the time the professional teachers. They were full-time Aikido teachers. And so Nado Sensei is sort of, it's always into this other stuff, right? And so I relate the story and what Hikisuchi Sensei said. And Nado Sensei said, "Don't believe him." And what he said was interesting. He said, all forces, all energies at their source are pure. There are no dark forces at an original level. I went, oh, And then I had that experience with the car wreck. And what happened is when I went from the light, and all of a sudden I was off the road, screaming down that embankment towards that fateful tree. Everything went dark, fast. Time slowed. It was almost like the same energies that came down came from a different direction. And they said, "Get that tree." And I never broken a boken, at least yet. I was holding the top half of that steering wheel. It had been sheared in two. And so I've had experience that way. That's not, and what happens is apparently John, he was in touch with a couple of the people that were in Japan from the Santa Cruz area. And so I go back to Japan again, and everybody, because John kind of wrote a letter and everyone else, "Oh, Jack, you did that, you did that." I'm a celebrity for some unknown reason there, but that's the direct experience. So, that's about it. So, there's a sense where, you can read about stuff from Michael Moorcock and about forces and energies, but they're real. It's just that most of the time we have this reality we create from the dialogue that we're trained from birth to actually cancel out those forces. And so we view them as dangerous or dark. And Nado Sensei's major thing is the monster theory. A lot of energies, a lot of times show as dark, but they're original pure energies. If we open to them, they become allies. They're not really dark. Anything before we move on?
I'm curious if you told Nado Sensei about the vision of the corpses floating by, what he thought about that.
Oh, it's just my own sense of what was there. That's what's tricky. A lot of times, what is very pure, we're conditioned to see as dark. All things at their origin are pure. That was an ally. When it came down this way, introducing itself to me, I freaked. And what I saw was, okay, that's a dark force. I better not do that anymore. And so in the docents, I said, don't buy into that crap. And so I had another experience. The rotting corpses, yeah. I mean, I went to go see the latest Jurassic Park movie. It's the first time I'd ever seen one of those on the big screen, and I was scared. We pay money to see things like rotting corpses. You know, you watch The Walking Dead, you know, things like that, right? But there's a kind of a, you know, there's light, dark, but there's original purity. And here, a lot of times, you know, we look at what we don't understand as, and so my mind creates rotting corpses. Those are energies, and they saved my life. So, yeah. And so when you do that, I mean, you realize, you know, we're capable of so much more. In a lot of ways, you know, the imagination is oftentimes more real than the world we fabricate as being real. That's why science fiction, science fantasy, comic books, I've always found them to be more real than this world. Okay? I mean, in a certain way. Anything?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, you know, speaking as a science fiction and fantasy writer, you can, you know, hit profound truths in that kind of storytelling from an angle, right? Instead of trying to go directly at the reader, where you could bounce off whatever biases and, you know, for example, movie, the new Superman movie, right? There's a conflict between two made up countries that are both from the comics, I gather. You know, and you could, you know, pull a real world analog, like, you know, you could say, oh, well, it could be Russia and Ukraine or whatever, but it's not exactly that, because it's fictional, it's made up. And so any biases the viewer has about, say, Russia and Ukraine, you know, toward one side or the other, those are bypassed, right? And you can see who is right and who is wrong in the fictional countries. And like the Baravian government is clearly a bad government, right? But it's made up because it's science fiction, really, right? Superman is an alien, it's science fiction. And
well, the problem is the Baravian government does exist. It's just named in reality.
right.
And the other thing about that is that the movie has awakened some controversy because in some circles it's too woke. Superman doesn't worry about the countries. He rules, you know, he has concerns about human life and decency.
And squirrel life.
That's right. There's a squirrel about to die. He rescues the squirrel too. Why? Because he can, and that's who he is. And you know, you contrast that with a lot of world leaders now, and their use of power is not that way. their use of power is to grab more power, more control, more wealth, strengthen their oligarchy. And, I mean, Clark Kent is Clark Kent, right? He's the normal guy. And at the end of the movie, he has a conversation with Lex and says, I mess up all the time, da 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 da. But that's my greatest superpower. And, in this area, I mean, you're looking at things a certain way that I do as well. And I can look at that and say, yeah, I'm kind of woke too, so I like the movie. But that's not the point of it. I mean, the way that, the whole thing was pictured with those little kids, chanting Superman's name, and they're about to be killed. And Superman's busy saving Metropolis. This is choice. Is they going to do this or that? But the quote unquote Justice Gang goes over there and does what Superman would have done, which is nice. I mean, there's an area where that's what America used to be. Or so we were presented with ourselves that way, is that, yeah, we have more. We welcome people in. We help other economies. And then all of a sudden it's become I, me, us. And the woke stance is weak. And it's really kind of unfortunate that something like it's a comic book. Okay, it's a comic book reality. Guess what? I prefer the comic book reality to this reality. I'm aware of this reality, but certain aspects of it really turn me off. And I mean, Luther getting caught up in that deal. I mean, right now we're running into the stuff with Epstein and Trump. I mean, I have no idea what, but obviously a certain person in the Oval Office is cringing right now. And that fear is real. Now, what is the fear of? We don't know yet. Or if it's anything at all of the fact that he's being accused of something that he's painted himself as an image of, it's like, I'm going to clean up the swamp and all this, because he's projected, right, all the stuff that he's now being kind of pulled into it is being just the left wing, the leftists are pedophiles. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, this looks suspicious here. You're not exactly who you say you are. And Superman is exactly who he says he is. Right? And he's Clark and he's Superman. He's both. And, he might have been sent here. I mean, I don't even know if that's real or not, because Glix could have doctored the whole thing, right, to conquer us. But if he was, then he sort of has made his own choices and created himself to be who he is through his choices, not through his programming or what his parents wanted him to be. So, to me, it's like, that if, what is the Buddha? The Buddha is the awakened one. And what is transformation? It's this process of awakening to what's really inside who we truly are. And in that way, it's a very important thing. So, the sense of it sometimes is tricky, because if you experience that, in other words, I've been in it, and it molds you. And in the movie Superman, I mean, by the way, we post this, go see it, because I was telling my daughter, it's my favorite Superman movie. better than all the others. Two, I haven't decided yet whether it's my very favorite all-time superhero movie. I gotta go see it again, and then I'll decide. But right now, it's up there. And it's not that the characters are new or anything like that. It's just that what I kind of liked about it was that, in a sense, if that's woke, woke has been turned into a four-letter word. It's about awakening. Superman doesn't even want to see a squirrel squished. That's strength, especially if you have the power to be of service. And that represents nature. All right. And so much of technology is power over nature, and we're paying for it. Right. I mean, it's just the whole priorities of the world is just really screwed and upside down. And that's kind of what Nadeau Sensei was saying. It's like, hey, you're doing sacred prayers, right? And you call up energies. They can't be dark. They may show as dark. And if they do, the dark is not necessarily bad or evil. And it's very easy for certain people. I mean, there's good, bad, yes. But what we're really talking about is consequences. All right? I mean, I pray, for, basically Ukraine, Israel, but part of my prayers is that I'm not rooting for a side, I'm rooting for the conflicts to be resolved. People are dying. And I thought, that scene where Lois is interviewing Clark and they go into that thing. And, she's like, well, you just went in there and you did that. And you didn't ask for permission or get any sort of, I said, yeah, what I saw was people were going to get hurt, people were going to die. So I acted, right? So, yeah, if you were that way, you were Superman. I think there's an old, it's old now, but The Dark Knight Returns, where this kind of Ronald Reagan president, he has put Batman and all the superheroes out of business. And Superman becomes kind of a stooge for the government. And his rationale, because, Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent meet, they have a dialogue. And, Clark says, well, I know you think I've sold out, which he has. But this way I can do some good. And Clark, Bruce Wayne doesn't buy it. In a way. So he kind of comes out of retirement. And even though he's older, the Dark Knight returns. And so, that's kind of a sense right there. I mean, there's a couple other comic book arcs where Kingdom Come, where Superman retires, lets the world basically go to hell. But then he comes back, gets the Justice League together. And the problem is all the super beings have procreated and their kids are running rampant over the world. And so they're creating all this chaos. And so Superman decides to be Donald Trump and put all the super children in prison. It's a bit like, we'll send you to El Salvador. You don't have any rights. And in fact, it gets so bad, he goes and tries to talk to Aquaman. Can we store these people in your undersea kingdom? No. He goes even to the dark side planets that I like to put them here. No. And then eventually it becomes such a powder keg. And Lex Luthor, of course, has a plan. In fact, Batman, after a while, initially says, Clark, I can't support you here. you're ignoring people's rights and putting them away and everything like that. You're not going to solve issues just by bringing the Justice League together again and punching everybody out. You're going to create problems. But what happens is that he joins Luthor to find out what Luthor's doing. At the very end, of course, he and Superman and Wonder Woman, they get together and there's a lot of death and destruction, but Superman kind of comes to an understanding of who he is, what he can't do. It's a beautiful story. It's called Kingdom Come. And that, along with Dark Knight Returns, are the two big ones for me, in terms of comic books. Anything?
Well, I haven't read those particular comic books, so
Oh, you haven't read them? You should. I mean, the Dark Knight Returns is more an 80s, 90s, but it was very influential. In fact, the Superman versus Batman is based on that. The Dark Knight Returns.
sure.
Yeah, and Kingdom Come hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, that
But,
was as I recall, Alex Ross did the art for that.
The artwork is
Yeah,
exquisite.
stunning.
The writing is first class. You feel for Superman because initially I think the Joker kills Lois Lane, and Superman is kind of perceived in those times as being too woke. That all these there's superheroes that will go and they'll kill and they'll do all this stuff, and then the whole situation goes out of control as there's procreation and super beings are created at a rate and they're all out of control and it's a mess. But Superman has to come back, and he's unfortunately he plays the role of Donald Trump. Okay, we got to put you in a prison. We got to control you, right? Can't let you walk around. You have no rights. and seeing Superman in that role is actually pretty interesting. And then Batman, of course, is somebody who scopes the whole thing out, and he goes into the dark side for a little bit because he wants to find out what Luthor's planning. And then he joins Superman. And it's, the thing, it's not, it has a happy ending because so many people die. That, basically is an area. And Superman has to come to grips with who he is, not who he thinks he is. And he has to kind of bury the dead and realize that, his choices have created this. And that's something that I guess we sometimes don't realize that, I mean, that's one of the reasons I really like the Superman movie, because if any of us were basically godlike like that, but we also were praised and we had values. You get too carried away with the super and lose the man, then you've destroyed your balance. Lex Luthor wants more and more power and control. He wants to be right. He's operating off of a bunch of crazy stuff. But he's got talent and power. And in some sense, I mean, if you kind of look at Clark Kent, he's pretty ordinary. So, in a way, I mean, the whole movie, I actually really, really liked. And as I said, woke has become a 4-letter word. It shouldn't be. The word is awakened. The Buddha is the awakened one. And towards the end of the movie, what are you going to do? You thought your parents sent you here to protect and save humanity. It turns out their edict for you was totally opposite. But you get to choose who you are. You get to create yourself. You don't have to be. You can believe your prior beliefs about what your mission is here, or you can kind of react to what your parents apparently censor you. But you get to choose. And in some sense, that's why Sensei created Aikido to some degree. It's not just learn fancy stuff and have fun. That's good. Might as well do that, by the way, right? But there's another dimension to it. And sometimes, that is lost in all this, right? And, I mean, I've been right up against it. I felt it, I've been in it. And that's about it. I mean, we're at 1:00. So anything before we break? Anything you'd like to add?
No, it's been a good discussion, good class.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, the stories are important, because I live in the comic book universe, so I like the stories too. But I've had direct experience of some of that stuff. And it's both liberating and scary. And it's a good scary. I know what that means, but I mean, the rotting corpses was not fun. Screaming down that embankment was not fun.
No.
I've had a couple other instances where, it's like everything speeds up and time slows down. And what happens there. I've had a couple of those in my life that, been, basically, it's almost like the kami have been allies. Again, that original thing on the rooftop with the dark. But somehow, I kept going with it. I mean, I wish I had more contact with that, but that's another matter. Anyway, we'll see you hopefully on Sunday.
Yep, that's the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sensei.
Okay, we will see you later.